Forgot to pray.
Travis, this is one of those times when I'm always excited to see you, but we talked last week about I am that I am and the passage in Exodus where God names himself. And I'm so excited to finish this. And this is Travis and Ross, and this is Notes On, and we try to do Christ on purpose, and we're going to get to Christ with I am that I am. So where do you want to pick up?
We were talking about, I think, middle knowledge last week.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, by the way, I'm excited. You know why? Just one second. I'm leaving screen for a second.
Yeah.
And I'm back. I didn't fully leave the screen, though.
No, your big shoulder is still there. Yeah.
This came in the mail yesterday.
Oh, yes. Okay. Have you looked at it yet?
I've read the preface.
Good. Wow.
I will hopefully finish this before May so that when the second volume comes in, but this took months to come in because it was already out of stock. They were already, I think they went through their first round of printing. This book is over $60, and think of how many people have bought it. I mean, so many people have bought this. So this is sort of the new thing. But he says that he's not intending to be your normal systematic theology. It's going to be a systematic philosophical theology, as the title says. And he says that he's actually not spent a whole lot of time reading a whole lot of systematic theologies.
Wow. Well, that could be really good.
And well, he's picking two interlocutors, really, like they'll be his foils. One of them is his doctoral mentor, his advisor, as we call it in the States, but his I guess Dr. Potter, Wolfhart Pannenberg, who was arguably the greatest systematic theologian after in the 20th century. And then more in my neck of the woods, Herman Bavinck. And I quoted someone about Herman Bavinck last week, and I said that if I've arrived as a scholar, it's because in print it says that Campbell commits the same error as Bavinck. So here I was over the weekend, or yesterday actually, because I got this yesterday, so it couldn't have been over the weekend. I got this, and I was reading it, and he says Bavinck is really going to be the guy I'm going after. So I'm really looking forward to the next volume, because that's going to be the Doctrine of God, where he gets into what does Moses mean by I am that I am, or what does God mean when he says I am that I am to Moses? Because Craig is not going to agree with us on how we interpret that passage. So,
okay. So how is this a scholarly level book, or can the layman?
Oh yeah, you need to be familiar with philosophy to read it.
Okay.
Now I'm not saying that if you're not that familiar, you shouldn't get it or something, but this is going to be the quintessential sort of evangelical Wesleyan Arminian approach to theology.
How many pages is it?
This first volume, it would be 4 or 5 volumes of similar length without footnotes. It's 306 pages.
Okay.
No, without the bibliography, and then I would imagine that the next volume is going to be a little bit thicker, because that's on the Doctrine of God. So that's going to be really interesting, and he will be defending his social Trinitarianism in that volume, which, in light of criticisms over the years, I'm really interested to see how he tries to handle that. So,
well, good.
I got my homework cut out for me.
Well, let's talk about I am that I am. We made the point last time that names in Hebrew world, and even most of the world now, are more than just a word that identifies someone. They also have a meaning that when parents named their kids, then it was hopefully something that the child would become or something physical about them, but it was a descriptor, not just a word like Bob or Fred.
Sure.
And if that's true, which we believe, and then you combine that with asking God what his name is, you're going to get quite an answer. And, we mentioned that I am is 5 words in English. It's only 3 in Hebrew. And yet there's been just volumes and volumes and volumes written about this beautiful, bottomless description of God.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, absolutely. And the controversy is interesting. So one of the interesting things to get into is how someone like Craig will handle a verse like that, and someone like myself or you, those of us who lean more towards the classical view of God. So, and I think that the battle going on between conservative Christians on exactly how to understand the divine nature is going to be with us for the next generation, I would imagine, if the Lord tarries, which I hope he's not.
Yeah. Well, why don't you and I do what we want to do with it, and then if we have time today or next week, we can talk about how William Lane Craig would handle it.
Sure.
Let's start with this, Travis. You probably, I'm sure you know this. I mean, there's a lot of ways to translate that. I am that I am is not the only way.
That is correct.
I wrote down a few that I thought are pretty interesting. I will be what I will be. This one I really like. I am the being. It's kind of like your phrase, I am the party. I am the existing one. And this is my favorite because I think it communicates the best. I will be because I am because I was.
Right. The reason the differences exist is, first of all, because like it's in the imperfect tense. And so the imperfect tense in Hebrew is generally translated future, but there are exceptions, notable exceptions. So what is God trying to communicate here? And those who say, well, we're not getting a dose of metaphysics in this text. This text is not giving us the metaphysical truth that God is the one true being. He who is being as such, or the simple existing God who exists from eternity, the self-existent one. All of those, that's all metaphysical stuff. And the Bible's not a book of metaphysics, and therefore, so the argument goes, what we're dealing with is a God who is expressing his covenantal faithfulness to Moses. So in the phrase, I will be what I will be, that is, I will always be with you. I will always be near you and for you. So that's the kind of message that's being conveyed in the text.
Well, I think, can't it be that and the other stuff too?
Well, that's the beauty of the classical tradition. We can appropriate all of what new insights are giving us about what a text may read. So I don't have to accept my view to the exclusion of what any new insight may give that's perfectly legitimate in the context. And it is true, A, that it's in the imperfect tense, and B, that that God is communicating his covenantal faithfulness to Moses. I mean, for goodness sake, he says, I am the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in that context. So he's clearly saying, I'm remembering the covenant.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and I've done a full study of this on my own, I am convinced that it is far more likely than not the correct translation is the traditional one. And we have it in the Septuagint. The Septuagint translates it as "haon," like "I am the being," as you indicated. So early
Yeah.
on, Jews were catching on to this kind of reading of the text. And given everything else that we read about of God in the text, especially in Isaiah, when Isaiah just speaks of the God before whom no God was ever formed, nor will come after, the one who's eternal, and so on and so forth. That kind of deity is revealed in a nutshell in Exodus 3.
You know, there's another interesting feature here, Travis, that we almost always overlook. I want to read verses 14 and 15. And you notice here that God doesn't just identify himself in one place here, he actually does it 3 times. He says, God said to Moses, I am who I am. That's number one. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. That's
Right.
2. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. So he's calling himself, I am who I am, and Yahweh, which is, I am who I am, and then the God of your fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. So, 3 times. It's not just that one thing.
That's right. So, do we, in order to be consistent, like tell them I am has sent you? Do we, are to be consistent, do we say tell them I will be sent you? That's not the most, I think, consistent translation. So I think even though it's possible to translate it that way,
Yeah,
what you're just saying is one of the reasons is you're giving one of the reasons why I would say that the best translation is the traditional one, I am.
well, it also conveys, I mean, there's so much, and you and I are going to go into that, but God's, he's just there through all time. When it says God doesn't change, it means, you know, his point of view, he can see our past, our present, our future, all at the
Mhm.
same moment, if you want to use that word.
Sure.
He's just stationary. He is just there. And he doesn't change, so he's completely reliable. And that's conveyed better in I am that I am than any of the other translations, I think.
Right. Absolutely. It's not that unless you want to say I am what I will be, which would connote immutability. There's nothing
Yes,
about me now. That's another possible translation. I don't prefer it, but there's nothing about me now that is different than what I will be in the future.
that's right.
I think I would like to address this common thing we hear about the Bible not being a book of metaphysics.
Yeah.
That is such baloney. The Bible is a book about metaphysics. To say that God exists is to make a metaphysical claim.
Yes, absolutely.
You're saying you're talking about reality, and reality is such that there is a being we call God, or to say there is a soul distinct from the body. That is a metaphysical claim, and the Bible addresses those issues. So we have to move away from this weird view that people have. Well, the Bible is not a metaphysical book. It is a metaphysical book in 2 senses. One, it is derived from a being who is beyond nature, metaphysis, beyond nature, but also it is a book that addresses metaphysical issues.
I
So
don't
you
see
can't,
how anybody could claim that. It's kind of seems kind of a ridiculous claim.
yeah, I guess I haven't done a deep dive into that, but there is it's sort of the zeitgeist of our day, a spirit of the age that says, you know, back in the Middle Ages, all they did was talk about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, and Those are just irrelevant questions. And when you open up the Bible, it's a historical book. It talks about it. It is the result of a historical process, and it's talking about things that we can know about, and it makes speculations about some things like the future and the apocalyptic literature, and but it's not giving us a vision of God such that God is just this abstract thing that we can't really wrap our minds around. God is understandable. So when you get into these high-end doctrines like simplicity or immutability, you're kind of losing the thread there. And so they want to bring God down so he's relatable. And when they read these texts, they will let the narratival text drive our understanding of the catechetical text. So if I'm in Genesis and it says God repented, well, I need to take that literally. I mean, it says God repented. So that means God changes in some sense. Well, then when I go to Numbers 23 and it says, I am not a man that I should lie or change my mind, or Malachi 3:6, I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore, you, sons of Israel, are not consumed. Those texts are saying that God doesn't change in other senses. So he changes in some senses, he doesn't change in others. Well, that just is a temporal God, a God who exists in the flow of time. And some aspects of his nature are influenced by the universe, and other aspects of his nature are not.
I just see it. Tell me what you think of this, because I've been working on this in my head lately anyway. God has many ways of looking at reality. His basic way, natural way, I don't know if that's an appropriate way to say it, is a timeless existence where everything is present to him in, like we just talked about, all at once. In that sense, he doesn't change. But he can choose to dive into the timeline if he wants. It's another way that he can observe reality. And when he's in the timeline, it's going to look like he changes just like we do, because he answers questions. He gets angry when somebody does something stupid. He repents. But that's not the problem with only seeing it that way, is that he has the ability to interact with reality in a lot of different ways. So we're only seeing a small part of that, and if we look at it on the timeline, it's going to look like he's just like us, because he's just responding.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to all kinds of ways to appropriate reading of the text with a classical view of God. I would say that those kinds of descriptions you're giving are more metaphorical, or what we call anthropomorphic. So the classical tradition does see that a lot of these texts are giving anthropomorphisms and anthropopathisms so that we can understand a little bit about who God is. Calvin, and he's not the first to say this, but he famously said that when God reveals himself to us in Scripture, he lisps to us as a parent might lisp to a child, or he's talking baby talk.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk baby talk to a child, you're never lying, but you are obviously not all of your expressions are to be taken in an absolutely literalistic fashion. Like when a parent, I used to do this with my son all the time when he was a kid, little child, all the way up until he was an adolescent. I would act surprised.
Yeah.
Now, am I lying to my child when I do that? No, I am conveying something to the child, though. I'm saying you ought to be surprised about this. This is an interesting thing, or I'm turning their eyes to direct on that. But I myself am not really surprised by the moment. I'm not saying, we see a police officer. Oh, look at the police officer. See the uniform he's got on? Isn't that interesting? I'm not surprised, but I'm
Right.
conveying to him that he needs to be aware of who that is. I mean, it's a teaching moment. So when God walks through the garden, is he essentially a body? Is he attached to a body such that he can move from here to there? Is he, when he calls out to Adam and says, "Where are you?" Is he genuinely ignorant
No.
of where Adam is? Now, my former professor, Scott Oliphant, actually says that God didn't know where Adam was.
Wow.
The stunned look on your face is appropriate. It took me a
Yeah.
while to, it's one of those lines I have to read. Like, I had to read it more than once. In fact, someone had to actually I skipped over it. I didn't even notice it because it's that weird. Maybe I didn't need it. It was The Majesty of the Mystery is where he says it. And it's not a very good book, so maybe I didn't even get to it. But anyways, somebody said, "Have you read those?" And I said, "Oh." And then when I read them, I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And so I've had to actually reread them multiple times because it's hard for me to imagine that a person who believes in the Bible actually thinks that God didn't know where Adam was. So what is going on in that text? Well, classically, we would say God is uttering a rhetorical question to prick the conscience of Adam. In the
Sure.
same way that I would do that with a child. I may know where the child is, but I may still ask questions that I know the answer to because this is a teaching moment. If you want to say that the early Hebrews had a conception of God wherein they would have initially read a text like that literally, I don't really have a problem with that. And here's why. They've just come out of Egypt. They've been introduced to polytheistic and pantheistic modes of thought. So I don't think that it's implausible at all that God, in order to train them, starts small and works up to a true understanding of who he is. So
Yeah.
in Genesis 1, we have Elohim, the transcendent one who created the heavens and the earth. And I have a feeling that this is God telling the Hebrews, the God that you understand sort of deep in the recesses of your heart, that's the God that created the heavens and the earth. And then he introduces his name in the next chapter, Jehovah or Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton. And it says Jehovah Elohim or the Lord God.
Yeah.
And at that moment, they're saying, "Oh, okay, who is this Lord God?" And as they're getting to know more and more about this Lord, it starts off with a being who descends from the heavens and walks around and asks, "Where are you?" And doesn't seem to know. But as you progress in the story, and for example, when we get to the story of Abraham, when I think it's Abimelech, when Jehovah goes to Abimelech and appears to him in a dream and says, "You've taken this man's wife. I'm going to kill you." And he said, "I didn't know." And then what does Jehovah say? He says, "Well, I knew you didn't know, and I'm not going to judge you because you have repented." So it looks like at first Jehovah didn't know that this man was unaware of the fact that he had taken Abraham's wife. But just a few lines later, Jehovah goes, I knew all along."
Yeah.
And so there's our teaching moment. Oh, well, maybe back in the garden, he knew too. Let's keep reading about this God. And we're introduced to names of God like El Ra'i, the God who sees, or El Shaddai, the all sufficient one, the almighty one. Okay. So as you're introduced to these names, it's like, okay. This maybe Jehovah is not merely an expression of Elohim, a shadow of Elohim, or an attribute of overarching God that made everything, kind of like Ra is, kind of Isis is, but rather Jehovah just is Elohim. So that's kind of how I see this unfolding mystery of God. He meets you where you are, but then he says, "You're not getting it all if this is where you stop. Let me tell you more about me."
Yes. Okay. So I'm headed for something a little different though, and I think it has to do with a point of view. If I put my hand up, that's my hand. If I turn it sideways, that's my hand. That's my hand. It looks different. If God's infinite way of seeing everything all at once is broken down into moments and then inserted into a timeline so that we can see the flow of it, it's going to look like he changes his mind. When Hezekiah asked him for, longer life, and God changed his mind, it says, and gave him another 15 years. I think,
Absolutely.
what if we looked at it like this, Travis? What if that's an absolute legitimate way to look at it within the timeline?
No, I think that's true, and I don't know if I'm scratching where you're itching when I say this, but if you try to imagine, as impossible as it is, that you are a being who is timeless and eternal and all knowing, all powerful, all good, all that. Okay, so imagine you're that being. How would you communicate yourself to human beings?
That's a really good way to look at it. Yeah.
How would it not on occasion look like, well, you're changing your mind on occasion?
Yes.
When reality, that's not really true. I mean, you're not literally changing your mind. However, you are responding to prayer in such a way that it looks like you changed your mind.
Right.
Is that lying? That's what the Mormons want us to believe. That's what the open theists want us to believe, and even some neoclassicists. But I'm like, there's no other way that such a being could reveal himself in a way that we could understand.
That's a really good a good way to put it. And I think I have a good example. I wish I had it with me. So last year, the Dodgers won the World Series. Yeah. Okay. So let's pretend that this is a CD. It's not round, but pretend that this is a CD that has all 5 games of the World Series. I think it was. Okay.
Mhm.
Now there's two ways to look at it. If I look at it as a CD in my hand, it contains all the history of that World Series all at the same time in one place at the same moment. I can't read it that way, but it's there. Or I can
Mhm.
put it in a DVD player and watch it moment by moment by moment.
Mhm.
Either way, it's a legitimate way to see it. And
Mhm.
during if you play it and you didn't know who won, and you're involved in the drama of the World Series as it goes along, you're going to
Right.
enjoy the story and all the wonderful things that happen because the Dodgers won, unless you're a Yankees fan. But
Right.
the other way to look at it is to push the eject button, take it out, and see that the whole thing, the whole story, which never changes, it's always the same if you played it a million times, is there and at one view.
Right. In fact, I see kind of like I developed this point in my book, The Wonderful Decree. It's a very similar point.
Okay.
Well, I mean, this again is somewhat metaphorical because it's not like God has a DVD in his head, right? Um,
Right.
but there is a virtual distinction to be had between God's knowledge of all possibles and God's knowledge of the world as it is. And so it would be likened unto someone who had an infinite number of DVDs that describe multiple world ensembles.
Right.
Some DVDs give a story that only lasts 2 seconds, 2 nanoseconds. That's the history of the universe. Some last billions of years. Some possibilities just have no humans in them whatsoever. But among these world ensembles, there are DVDs that concern human beings, and more narrowed down. Some DVDs have you and me in them, and some of them don't. Some have me and not you, and you and not me, and on it goes.
Yeah.
And so God has selected that DVD, which will be reality.
That's right.
And the difference is that whereas you and I can think of a story in a book where the creatures in the book are free, but we can't create them. I mean, we can't create them really.
Right.
God can actually make them come into existence and live out their lives in exactly as he envisioned in the DVD.
And they still have free will.
So as I was saying, since he is envisioning them as free creatures,
yes, that's right. Yes,
they are doing these things freely. And so far from destroying free will, the divine decree actually upholds it and ensures that it is free when you're doing it, that you are free when you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, and this is, again, a metaphor, but a wonderfully good and helpful explanation as to how God can ordain whatsoever comes to pass, and yet at the same time, I maintain my freedom.
Yep.
But we're out of time.
That sucks. Yeah. Well, next week we'll keep at this. This is a great topic. I love this. I am that I am. Yeah.
God bless you, sir.
You too, brother. See you next week.